6 minutes to 9. There's been a lot to take in the last few days of the COVID inquiry, including the suggestion that senior figures in government and the NHS did not pay attention to the particular ways in which women were being affected, including accounts of protective equipment in intensive care, those goggle-style masks, you may remember, the visors, the gloves, which were often too big for female staff and did not fit them properly. That was just one of the many issues raised by Helen MacNamara, then a senior civil servant in Downing Street in her evidence. She actually said in her written evidence to the COVID inquiry, women working in number 10 and the Cabinet Office were experiencing very obvious sexist treatment. Let's speak now to Justine Greening, Minister for Women and Equalities from July 2016 to January 2018 in Theresa May's government. Justine, good morning.
Morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. What's your instinctive reaction to what you heard in the evidence yesterday from Helen MacNamara?
Well, I listened to much of Helen's evidence, and I think she painted a picture of a government that I recognise. I think the challenge is that good decisions need different voices and views fed into that. And actually, the point Helen was making was broader than just gender, in fact. She was talking explicitly about the failure to recognise inequalities, that the fact that it's a problem on policy making if you think that, as she put it, everyone is leading the same life as you do. And I think what's interesting is, although this inquiry looks at COVID, actually the point she made, which is a very important one, is that it's a more institutional problem for government, that if you don't have enough people with a broad experience of the lives being led by a wider population, then you're unlikely to get decisions right. And as she put it, it wasn't a deliberate or willful disregard for those lives. She said they weren't even considered in the first place. And I think there are some real broader lessons to be learned for government on both ministerial but also civil service lines on getting much more diversity of thought and background into decisions taken.
Well, and diversity of class as well, which I really want to talk to you about, because I know it's something you've spoken about passionately in the past. Just the way in which we could talk about the small ways in which greater cognitive diversity, so more people thinking more differently from different backgrounds with perhaps different educational and experiences, can change things. It really was a significant issue, wasn't it, during the pandemic, that, for instance, those visors which people, including nurses, were having to wear in hospitals often just didn't fit women. So intensive care doctors might say that they had nurses who were just, the visors, the PPE that they had was often just not fitting right. And if you had more women at the top making decisions, the chances of that being neglected would probably be reduced.
Exactly. I mean, it's not rocket science. I think we know that if you have narrow perspectives, you end up with groupthink and bad decisions. The wider range of voices you have around a table feeding into a discussion, the more likely you are to consider all the points of view and get it right. And of course, if you're running a country where the decisions you take affect the whole population, not just a subset of it, then it's incredibly important to do that effectively. So for me, this is a crucial area, and certainly as Education Secretary, making a case for funding for children's services to Treasury, my concern was always there weren't enough people that I was talking to in that department who had a sense of why children's services matters, the sorts of people who rely on it and the sorts of children who rely on it. And I think if there isn't that range of experience, then it is going to be hard for people taking decisions to get them right.
Well, so forgive me for interrupting. Let's talk about class. Let's talk directly about it, because I think that's the implication of much of what you said. You, as I understand it, you went to a comprehensive. Lee Kane, who gave evidence for, earlier this week, was working class. He's spoken before about his quite difficult childhood at times and what an outlier he was in that political environment, because most people didn't have the kind of background he did, particularly when things like Marcus Rashford came up. There does seem to be a real public school flavour to the chat yesterday that was revealed by Helen MacNamara, and that class issue is almost as important as anything else, isn't it?
I think so, because actually it runs across all the points that Helen, in many respects, was making. She talked about the issues of gender, but actually she was also talking about women in very disadvantaged positions facing domestic abuse, the fact that they had children with mental health concerns and found it hard to get support. She talked about carers. She was talking about people who, for a variety, she talked about ethnicity, people for a variety of reasons who suffer disadvantage. And
and
so
who
that
just
is
don't
very
feel.
much related to
Yeah.
background and the fact that in a country with weak social mobility, those are people who
Some
started
people don't
with
feel represented.
disadvantage and stay with
Forgive me,
disadvantage.
Justine. I'm so sorry to interrupt. We have run out of time, but thank you very much indeed for joining us.